Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
This week on the podcast, we wanted to talk about humor, and we figured that we couldn't really do that justice ourselves. So we're really excited to have a comedian and a student of depth psychology with us today. Elliot Morgan is a comedian from the Valley Folk on YouTube and the podcast The Fundamentalists, which you can find on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can find out more about him and see what he's up to at his website, elliottmorgan.com, which we will put in the show notes. And Elliot recently had a comedy special on Amazon Prime called Holy Shit. And as far as I know, it is the only stand-up routine that has ever worked in a reference to Carl Jung. So, Elliot, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. That was a wonderful intro.
So, Elliot, tell us your story.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you guys for having me on here. This is very lovely. You also forced me to get out of bed really early in the morning. And so I feel like an adult, which is nice. My name is Elliot. I do comedy. I do stand-up comedy, hoping to do more of it very soon again, God willing. But I grew up in Florida. I was raised evangelical Christian for a very long time. I went to college and studied zoology for a while. Then I moved out to Los Angeles to pursue my dreams, and I ended up getting caught up in this thing called YouTube, which ended up sort of changing my life in a very nice way. I worked for a thing called SourceFed, which was comedy news, and we would pump out like 5 videos a day, and it became very popular and sort of launched me into this world of hosting and comedy and writing. And then in 2018, 2017, I started a company called The Valley Folk, which was sort of a reunion for SourceFed, at the same time trying to do different types of stand-up specials. I released one stand-up special called Premature, and then I did a second one called Holy S-Word, or Holy Crap, if you will. That's available on Amazon Prime. And now I do a podcast also called The Fundamentalists with one of my best friends who's like a Lacanian psychoanalyst. And he's kind of how I got into this whole world a little bit through Freud first, through Lacan, all that fun stuff. And then that got me into Jung, which then this past year I decided to go back to school and study depth psychology. I think it's all very fascinating. So now I'm balancing work and depth psychology. And I think that covers everything. And I just got engaged, but that's more the part. That's the cherry on top, I guess.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And she said yes, which was shocking. So it all worked out.
Well, I am curious about, because you refer to it in your stand-up routine, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's called Holy Shit, and it's available on Amazon Prime. And we've all heard that word before, both of them, in fact, of how it was growing up in the community you grew up in. That's quite an arc from Central Florida, and I'm in Florida, but on one of the coasts, to where you are now.
Yeah, it's such a, I mean, I'm still wrapping my head around just the sheer contrast of the upbringing and to where it is now. But it never felt growing up like anything bad. But it was, when you look back, it's like, oh yeah, that actually there was some weird stuff that went down with the laughter revival and all that. And that guy's still out there doing his thing. It's a very surreal sort of thing to remember as a kid, and it feels so normal. I guess you're baked into it. And then I came out to Los Angeles, and then I also got married very young. So I got married when I was like 20 years old, and then ended up getting a divorce around, I think, 26 or 27, something like that. And I think that was one of those things that, like it was basically a midlife crisis in my 20s. And I think that kind of launched me into getting into more of this type of stuff, this type of world. And then also sort of, it's what got me completely, I think, mostly out of, I would say, the more religious, like fundamental, like mental underpinnings, I guess I had. I'm still unpacking it. It's still a lot to deal with, because I assumed everybody grew up like with that kind of situation and being prayed over with anointing oil and prophesied over. And then to find out that actually, no, that doesn't happen. Most people don't experience that. It's still strange. So it's all fun. Much work to be done, I would say.
So you had a midlife crisis when you're 26. So you're very precocious.
I like to get it done out of the way, just knock it out as quickly as possible. Yeah, I mean, it knocked me on my butt too. And it was after too, I think that my ego needed to be checked a little bit. Yes. And yeah. And it definitely happened. So it was such an insane time. And it was also just, it paralleled career stuff as well. Like it was just a terrible experience. But,
you had a real dark night of the soul there in your mid-20s.
Yeah,
it's exactly. And I think I'm good on them for a while. I think I've come to the conclusion. I didn't enjoy it too much, but I'm thankful for it. So that and it also, I think, re-enlivened sort of the spiritual side in some way. Like, and that's, I think, this past year what I've gotten back to with more of the depth psychology stuff. And that's been really wonderful.
I mean, I was wondering about that. You talking about being prophesied over when anointed with oils and everything. I mean, there is a way that exposure to the non-rational sets up this conduit to have these sort of experiences of the numinous in a way that if you have a very, very secular upbringing, sometimes I think it's almost harder to access that. But they each come with their own difficulties. I don't know if you want to say
100%. Yeah, I think that I have realized that I'm very thankful that I was raised in that environment, because it did add such a colorful element to my life. I mean, I think, probably traumatic to do to a kid if they think they're going to go to hell, for all eternity, or that everyone they love might go to hell. But at the same time, pretty intense, and kind of adds it's a very fantastical thing. And I think it probably embedded a bit of imagination in me that I'm very happy about. So it's definitely, there's good with the bad for sure.
Yeah, this laughter revival thing, combined with the threat of going to hell, is quite a combination. Talk about a union of opposites, of being sort of touched, falling down on the floor, and everybody howling with laughter. How does that combine with, some of the severity of this is the only way, the right way, or else?
Yeah, I didn't have, I don't think, too much of the fire and brimstone element to it. I think I picked up on that because it's in the stories and it's in the materials. So yeah. I was real curious about it my whole life. But then, you would go to the church and it would be like the preacher would be preaching something and someone in the back would be, or two or three people in the back would be hysterically laughing like the whole time. And it was just creepy. Like it was such a weird experience because they would interrupt the sermon, no matter what it was on. It would just be someone who would fall out into the aisle laughing. And I remember as a kid just being like, is this normal? And even at the time, my parents were like, this is a little, I think it bothered them too, I think. I like to think anyway. No, I definitely did. But
there's a thing called laughter yoga too. That was really big in New York where I was living I don't know, I'll say 10 or so years ago, which was a structured thing using sounds to get people laughing. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting thing that I'd never heard of in the Christian tradition. I'm also wondering, what is your relationship like with your family and your community back in Florida?
My family is great. We are all very close. I would say, despite being across the coast, I miss them with everything with the pandemic and quarantine. They're being in Florida. I'm sure you know it's a little bit more open, to say the least, and we're very shut down here. But they're wonderful. They're incredibly supportive. They're fun. My mom and dad work. My mom is actually a marriage and family therapist as well, and my dad has a construction company, and so it was a great mix growing up of spiritual fun stuff, artistic stuff, but then also like still blue collar. And yet my dad's also artistic and paints and and he's like a more of a man's man than I am, I guess I could say, with this background. Can't really claim to be super manly looking, but yeah, they're really wonderful. And I think that they're, as they get older, it's, we're just getting closer, I think, which is really nice. It feels very good. I have no traumatic stories there, which is, I'm very blessed, I would say.
So when in your childhood did people begin to notice that you were funny, that you were
I'm still waiting on them to notice. I'm just waiting. One day they're going to start laughing. I'm going to not have to add the laugh track every time. I don't know. I think when I was a kid, I did theater as a kid and I loved that. And I never really was trying to be a stand-up comedian. I always didn't really know what that was. I just wanted to be Jim Carrey. And so I would try to be Jim Carrey all the time, and then moved out to Los Angeles and then sort of fell into this side of things. And I also just think at SourceFed, it was like this boot camp for comedy in a weird way. Like I worked with some of the funniest people that I think are alive and still get to. And I think most of them are way funnier than I was, but it was because we were making so much content. We would show up every day at like 6 a.m. and we would start writing, and we'd have the first thing shot by like 7 a.m. It would be online by 9 a.m. And we would do that 5 times throughout the day. So it became, writing became like we just got very good at it, very quick at it. And I don't know if did I answer the question?
Well, it sounds like it crept up on you. And then all of a sudden you found yourself kind of serendipitously, in California. But I'm struck by, in your Amazon Prime special, how crafted each of your pieces were, and trying to hit different notes for the audience, which let me know that you have a whole process behind how you're crafting your stories, how you deliver them. There is, in fact, a whole psychology around humor and why human beings find something funny or not funny. So I'm wondering, how do you experience your own philosophy around crafting for your stand-up?
That's like one of my favorite parts of the whole process, is just sitting down. And a lot of comedians will get on stage and they'll riff and they'll come up with material on the spot. And I think that's really cool. I think of those folks as comics, I think is the correct term. And I consider myself more of like a comedic writer. I love just sitting down and playing with the language a little bit, trying to find misdirections, and then also doing callbacks. And like you're saying, yeah, thank you for noticing that. I was pretty proud of at least the structure of that special, because I was trying to say uncomfortable stuff up top, call back to it at the end, still have some kind of a moral, woven through. And then my favorite part about it, though, and I think this does relate a lot to Jung, is because a lot of the stuff I'm just learning these terms that are it puts into context after the fact things that I've experienced, especially in writing comedy, which is there is like this weird, I guess the term would be almost liminal space, some sort of like or transcendent function at times. Like there's, and please correct me if I butcher any of these terms, but there will be moments where when I'm writing, it's like I'll know that it didn't feel like me writing it. And that's usually the jokes that tend to work. And then I'll try it on stage. And if they don't, then they don't, and we move on. But those are the coolest moments, I think, where it's like, oh, I don't know where that came from.
Well, it's interesting because I was doing a little bit of reading about the psychology of humor as we were prepping for this. And of course, I think this is well known. One of the things that sort of defines humor is this mismatch between expected and presented material. So it's the thing that's unexpected. And I'm so glad you brought in the transcendent function, because I do think that humor is perhaps the best example of the transcendent function in just this sort of everyday way, that there's something that's completely incongruous. And in that second where we hear it, this incongruous thing, our brain is going, wait, well, what is that? And then suddenly there's this, and that's the moment that we laugh. It's these two things that don't seem to go together at all. And usually they're connected in this metaphorical or kind of absurd way that tickles us.
Yeah.
So I think that's just perfect. And talking about that sense of something kind of coming through you and mentioning that liminal space, I mean, I think it's also related to Winnicott's idea of transitional space, which is, of course, where play happens and where symbolization happens. And this is all in the realm kind of the metaphoric and the symbolic, really. I think we're in the same general territory. It's interesting because I know there was this study done at a university in California in like 2017 about humor. They did like brain imaging of people crafting jokes, and they found that the professionals more just let kind of free association activate, whereas people who, like me, were using more of like their rational function to try to craft a joke. And
interesting.
So I think it's exactly kind of what you're saying, that you're really letting the unconscious sort of come up with the joke, which is lovely.
Wow, that's really, I had no idea about the brain imaging.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah, very cool.
So it's such an interesting tie-in exactly with Jungian stuff. And now all of a sudden I really kind of get the linking up for you at Pacifica and depth psychology, because it's really all about having a connection between the unconscious and consciousness. And that's what happens in dreams, and it's what happens in humor. It's what makes us laugh, is those two things that are a mismatch from a left brain rational perspective, but they go together and we get it. The same way that some wacky image in a dream is like, no, but I get that. It's meaningful. And it is that combination of those two parts of ourselves hitting a chord that takes us out of our usual mental space. It happens in lots of ways. But I don't think I thought of it as applying to humor until right this moment.
It's it's wonderful. It's, I remember back when I was first starting stand-up, I read this like really basic book that was like how to do stand-up. And it was terrible. I think I have it somewhere. It's not good, but it was, it did have a diagram in there that stuck out where it sort of just like showed a joke, and it showed like the setup and then the punchline and then the misdirection and the line down from like the setup, and how your brain just keeps going along hearing what the setup, and then it was like the one good thing in it where I was like, okay, that actually does make sense in a weird way. And that gap between what people are expecting and what comes afterward it's the perfect. And the jokes like that are really well written to me just really never get old. It's just, they tickle me. And then you add to like the performance element to it, which that's what I struggle with. I can get very stiff and very like I wrote the joke, here's the joke, I have to say every word correctly. And some of the best comedians I know of also know how to just incorporate their physicality on stage. That's my next thing that I'm trying to get better at when things open up.
Elliot, what's your Myers-Briggs typology? Because much of what we're talking about has to do with how the psyche is structured.
I'm actually taking a class. I think it's not next semester after that in that, but I think I'm like an INTP, I think. But you could probably tell me more about what that means than I could at the moment. But I think it's something. And no, it's not. I think it's I do think it's E. It used to be I, so it is E. I think I switched over. I'm in the extroverted side now.
Came over to the dark side.
I can update. Yeah, the dark side. Yeah, no longer as brooding.
Is that when you went blonde?
That might have been it. Yeah, I did this for a campaign to get people to vote, and for the Valley Folk group that we do, and then my girlfriend at the time liked it, and I need to get rid of it because it does. I forget that I look like this, and I go out and I'm like, oh, people just think I look like a punk. I was holding a door open for a guy the other day, and he was a homeless gentleman, and he called me tough guy when I held the door, and I was like, tough guy. I was like, I look like I don't look like a tough guy, and it stayed in my head all day. And I was like, why did he call me? Why on earth would he think I'm a tough guy? And I looked in the mirror and I saw this hair and I was like, oh, he probably just thinks I'm a jerk. Okay, I get it. Oops.
Elliot, I want to take a little pivot here and talk a little bit about the role of shadow and humor, because I think there is a real congruence between the role of the analyst and the archetype of the fool, because both are tasked with speaking the unspeakable. And we think about Shakespeare's fools saying things that normally, the court would not tolerate, but saying it in a way where a message can get through. And of course, saying things that are shocking, or even using toilet humor or body humor, all these things that don't get spoken in polite conversation.
My goal with the last comedy special was to say basically every bad thing I could think to say about myself. And I did not think of it in terms of shadow or individuation or therapy of any kind. Maybe therapy, I did think about it a little bit. But my whole aim was going, if I can say everything that I'm too scared to say, stuff that I'm too embarrassed to say or too ashamed of, and I can still keep going after this, then I'll be okay. Because I had felt at that point in my life prior to that hour and prior to what had happened with the divorce after my first comedy special, I had realized that I was trying really hard to come off like a really sweet, perfect Christian young man. And then when everything fell apart, I was like, I got to get all this out of my system as quickly as possible. And it's going to hurt and it's going to be embarrassing, but I'm going to do it because something is telling me that this is probably a good move. And I would say it was, but now it's like I have a more difficult time that I'm like happier now. So talking about like the darker things it's actually become a little bit more, I've become a little bit more, I guess, introverted about about sort of the comedy. Like it used to be, I would just say anything. I was completely like, here's this, and I did this, and this is, and this, you don't like it or whatever. And it was a little like, whatever you want to call it. But now I'm like, I don't know, maybe a little bit more tactful than I was prior. But I think that I definitely did enough of the shadow vomiting.
Yeah, so it's an integration process.
Exactly. And it never ends.
Yes. And hilariously enough, by talking about your shadow, the shadow is diminished. So in a way, it's therapeutic. And now what? What are we going to do for shadow?
Exactly. I can't be happy. I can't be this happy. I can't just be at peace. Ugh. It's horrible.
There's more where that came from, though.
Yeah, I'll find it for sure. I know that's. I was talking to a friend yesterday about who I do the other podcast with, the Freudian Peter, and he was like, we were talking about engagement and love and all that, and I was just like, yeah. Also, it's just exhausting. Like being like when you're in this experience, it used to be I had so much free time. I wasn't having fun and like enjoying this. And so I was doing way more comedy and I was like pumping more things out and like, this is, making more content. But when you get peaceful, sometimes it gets a little bit less productive. So I need to shake it up a little bit, I guess.
I find myself continuing to think about the confessional quality of your Amazon Prime special, and thinking about the work of Peter Berger. He's not well known anymore, but he was a sociologist, and he published a wonderful book around 1970 called A Rumor of Angels. And he says in that book that humor is a sign of human transcendence. And it's this remarkable almost supernatural capacity that human beings have to be in the middle of a situation and then radically shift their perspective in such a way that the same situation feels absurd and horrible at the same time. And that's a kind of magical property that human beings have. He says something relative to the confession that laughing in the midst of human misery implies that the misery itself will finally be overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a sign of hope. So for you to bring your confessional material forward and for people to laugh with you about that gives that signal. I wonder if that was part of it for you as well.
I think so, for sure. The title is based on the term felix culpa, which is the Latin for happy fall or something like that. And I had heard those words and I really liked it. And I had originally titled it Felix Culpa, but then I was advised that no one would know what that meant. So maybe choose a different one, Elliot.
You could have called it the restoration, the regressive restoration of the persona or something like that.
Exactly.
Instead.
Yeah.
Really catchy.
Yes. Further tenets on post-Jungian analytical psychology. So yeah, something really catchy. But yeah, I liked that term. I like the idea of the happy, the fall together, and then holy and shit kind of worked in that similar vein. And I was like, all right, that's fun. But I tried to definitely consciously approach it that way with the light and the dark and trying to just be like, hey, this is ridiculous, right? Like this is, there's some insane stories in there for sure that were nice to get out.
Joseph, I want to build on what you said, which is just so beautiful. I was checking to see what Barbara Hanna could tell us about Jung's sense of humor and found this great quote. Jung often used to quote Schopenhauer, who said, "A sense of humor is the only divine quality of man." And she goes on to say that Jung had more sense of humor than anyone I ever knew.
I think he's hilarious, personally. Truly do. He cracks me up. One of the classes I'm taking right now at Pacifica it's C.G. Jung in context. And so obviously we're reading from him and all the time. But the way he speaks, I get a lot of like sarcasm from him and a lot in a good way and a playful way. Like there does seem to be a tricksterishness to the way he communicates his ideas and incorporating light and dark, incorporating multiple parts of his psyche. So that part I just love. I definitely think he's underrated in his comedic value for sure.
And I actually have a little comedic story also from Barbara Hanna, which I just love this story. So she's talking about the first time she ever met him. She goes, she's living in Paris. She goes to Kuznets to see him. And she spends a long time, many paragraphs in the book, describing what he looked like and what it was like. She's in his waiting room and he comes out and she's really sort of blown over. And when one of the things she says is, Jung might have been a Swiss peasant rooted for centuries on his soil. At the same time, he obviously had by far the best mind I have ever encountered. Considerably shattered by these strong impressions, I bent down to pat the dog until I was recalled by Jung asking dryly, "Did you come from Paris to see the dog or me?"
Great question. You gotta pet the dog. I mean, goodness. Yeah, he does crack me up in his essays, as well as just like we did a module a few weeks ago where we explored Jung and the history of World War II, the years leading up to that, criticism surrounding some of his actions and words during that time. But one of the things that was positive, that was kind of cool, was, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of him going to his lawyer, who ended up being, or a guy named Rosenbaum, who was essentially a husband of a former patient of his. And he had his lawyer, who was Jewish, rewrite the bylaws for the Psychoanalytic Society that they were trying to pass that would exclude Jewish people. And so he basically took it to Rosenbaum and was like, "You're a lawyer, you know what you're doing, rewrite all this stuff and put in little loopholes so that Jewish people can still be practicing psychoanalysts." And Rosenbaum was like, Jung, you really are very young, like making a joke about his name. And Jung ended up getting a little upset by it. He ended up doing it because Rosenbaum realized Jung was going to do it anyway. And so he ended up doing it, and it worked. They ended up passing the bylaws, having no idea that they had been basically tampered with, and became null and void. And I was like, that is such, I don't know if it's funny, but there is a cleverness to it.
Well, it's trickster.
Yeah, totally. And there's a little bit of an ego to it. And I just like it. I was like, this is so fascinating that this guy was through and through. Just, he had this little, he winked the whole time. Constant, just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah,
I think this idea of tricking the powerful or depotentiating the powerful is an old comedic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's great delight that we all feel in that kind of downfall.
That's what it is. It was delight. It was a vicarious, like, you got him.
I am curious as to how you imagine the path ahead, combining a depth psychology graduate degree from Pacifica with comedy. What's your fantasy, or maybe lots of fantasies?
Lots of fantasies. I think my aim right now is to learn as much as I can, hopefully for writing in different capacities. So one path is creative writing, but another path more specifically, I think, is something that allows me to use comedy to hopefully help people feel a sense of purpose and lightness about their path going forward. That was sort of the, I guess, moral angle I came at last year when I was considering doing anything in school, because I was like looking around when everything was sort of falling apart, and I was like, I know I can have a brain. I know I have a brain. I was like, and I'm not really doing as much, I think, as I possibly could, because I think people need help and they need they need a belief system that works for today's era. And I think Jung recognized that at the time. And so I don't know what path specifically it'll take, but I do want it to be something that helps young people and helps them sort of just have a better time, have some hope. I think we've made this, I think you guys might have actually been talking about it at one point on a previous episode, but there seems to be this thing right now where it's like we've almost commodified a lot of mental health things, like sad, anxiety and depression and all that. It's become almost memes on social media and very overly accepted. And I'm like, this doesn't sit right with me very much. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to work out and read about, and then ultimately write about or speak about publicly. Or I might also switch programs, do the clinical psychology and go that route. But I like the idea of doing something for a mass of people rather than individual.
It sounds like a kind of a form of relativizing the ego, which is what comedy does, as we've already talked about, is it combines rational and non-rational with surprise and trickster elements and a lot of other things. But to help people kind of access some of the non-rational in themselves and about life. And I think I understand what you're saying about mental health stuff. We've got lots of categories and lots of labels and lots of memes. Boy, those categories get containing and tight.
And shallow. And
kind of formularized of here's what you do if you have this. If only it worked that way. And humor, I imagine, could be a great way to bust out of some of those little tight boxes.
That's the goal, I think, and hopefully to help other people question sort of the assumptions that they have about their own situations, I think, and the contradiction that's in the whole system, the contradiction that's in, like, okay, so I have this, so that's what I am now. I'm this thing. I am this name. And you're like, okay, I get it. Maybe, but...
And those diagnostic boxes from the first time it was sort of manualized in the 50s, I think, gone from 40 or 50 categories to over 300
It's a lot.
Separate labels that you too can paste on your forehead. And
I'm going to ask a personal question, and you can decline to answer it if you like. Have you been in Jungian analysis?
I have not been in Jungian analysis per se. I do go to therapy. He was trained. He's not strictly Jungian. I think he's definitely very Jungian and loves Jung. And he definitely recommended Pacifica to me, which led me to doing it. But yeah, I have a therapist by the name of Gary Penn, and he's wonderful. But he kind of borrows from all different things. I haven't done the actual Jungian.
What I wanted to lift up or lead into was a discussion about humor in the consulting room. I know that on one side of the couch, I have worked with many people through the years for whom humor is really important. And it's important for them, I can sense, that they bring it in and are able to be funny with me. And they get very prickly about, because I think I can think of several people who said, don't tell me I can't be funny because it's a defense. And, sometimes it is a defense, but sometimes it's a defense we need to let people have. And sometimes it's not a defense. It's a way of us playing together, be very playful with between the analyst and the analysand, and just appreciating them and enjoying them. I don't know if humor comes into your sessions.
Oh, it does. It does, for sure. I have I would say, very funny therapist. He cracks me up for sure. And he's very, very blunt, sometimes too blunt. One time, actually, the first time, maybe it was the second time I was seeing him, this was probably 4 years ago or something, like 4 or 5 years ago. I was talking to him about everything that was going on. It was in a very dark place. I was being very like, here's what's going on, I'm doing this. And, and this, I'm caught up in this thing. And I'm trying to figure this out. I'm living here. And I guess he could tell I wasn't being very open, like truly transparent. And so he hits me with this. He just goes, he starts pretending to be falling asleep. And I was like, what are you doing? He was like, sorry, he's like, I dozed off there for a second. And I was like, are you allowed to do that? And he explained, he was like, let's get to the meat. He's like, let's get, yeah. He's like, that's all fine. He's like, let's get into it. Like, really, like, he was like, come down to earth. Like, you don't have to be explaining everything, like all clinical. He was like, just tell me what's going on. And he was like, and I'll stay awake. And I was like, okay, I see what's going on. This is like a little bit of tough love that I think he could tell was okay for me, but who knows if he does it to everybody.
But he also opened it up in a humorous way. So he came at you kind of aggressively, but he did it playfully, which made it easier to, then you want to play back, someone, it's an overture. When someone is funny, it's an invitation to play.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a humanizing moment, which is really important.
It's such a great contrast of the aggressiveness and the poke, and then leading into something that's truly affiliative and playing together, like heads and tails of the same coin.
Yeah, he, I think last session I was in, he said we were talking about, I think, kids or something, and he said something along the lines of, women have penis envy, but men can have womb envy, because, we can't care. All we can do is get an erection. And I was like, yeah, we can only do that for like 4 seconds too. And he kind of looked at me and he laughed, and he like actually laughed. And I was like, okay, I got him. Like, I do try to like that. You think that's funny? All right. Maybe next one.
Yeah. I certainly laugh a lot when I'm working with my clients, because many of them are very, very funny.
I mean, yeah. And I think a lot of this stuff, especially the Freudian side of things, is just, it is kind of funny to me. Like, the ideas of it behind it are quite, they're rife for,
the jokes just write themselves.
Yeah. And they're all the same joke, but it's fun.
For the past 100 years.
Yeah.
They're still funny.
Still funny. Still works.
I want to go back. You said that you moved to LA to pursue your dreams. And I was so curious, what were your dreams? Why did you move to LA? What were you hoping for there?
I moved to LA hoping that if I could in any way work in Hollywood, I would be happy. I set the bar pretty low. I knew after getting a degree in zoology that I wanted to do something. I grew up in high school and in middle school doing acting, like, for a very, very, very long time, and I loved it. And it was like a performing arts high school, and we would study Stanislavski, and I just thought it was wonderful. Okay. when it came time for college, my folks were like, maybe major in something that you can actually do something with. So then I worked in animal hospitals for a very long time while getting a degree in zoology. And then I moved out to Los Angeles, made money like how some would do waiting tables. I worked at various animal hospitals and as a veterinary technician until SourceFed happened. And I would just go on every audition that I possibly could. And that led me to eventually doing SourceFed, which was great. But it was always just like, I just loved it. Like I was so enchanted by the mystique of Hollywood that I really naively believed existed, and still like love it. Still think it's very fun. I still, if I get the opportunity to go on like a set or a back lot or something, it always is just the coolest feeling to me.
It's numinous.
It is numinous. That's a perfect word. That's exactly what it is. And it's like I grew up watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is my favorite movie, over and over again. And it's, set in LA, and it's based in a true story kind of. And I remember like, this must be what it's like. And so I gave it a go. I
These
gave it a
big
go.
anthropomorphic animated characters running around.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just completely two-dimensional. Definitely a lot of that.
And tell me again, like, this part of your story was so quick. You somehow found Freud and then Lacan and then Jung. Take me down that path.
So I started reading books by a guy who I do the Fundamentalists with, who's one of my best friends, and his name is Peter Rollins, and he wrote some books one was called The Divine Magician, one was called Insurrection, and he has this idea that he talks about called pyrotheology. And it's based in, I think, a lot of Hegel. And he's just a very smart guy. He's an Irish guy, wonderful dude, brilliant. And I read his books, and then we developed a friendship over the years. We eventually became roommates for a couple years. And he helps, I think, people deconstruct a lot of their like religious underpinnings and also embrace mostly contradiction and sort of the finding satisfaction in dissatisfaction, basically. So that kind of opened up my world to philosophy, and that led to getting into like Kierkegaard and existentialism. And then ultimately, Jung snuck in there, and I just became fascinated with him.
And how did any of that map onto your Dark Night of the Soul?
All at the same time. I really piled it on. It was exactly that. I mean, it was like reading, I was consuming constantly during that time and trying to just be like, this isn't, I read this book called The Road Less Traveled. You guys heard of it? I'm sure. Yeah. That was like, that blew me away. I was like, this is my favorite book of all time. This makes total sense. And it spoke to me in a way that was almost creepy. Like it was an incredibly transformative experience to read that book. And that's when I started just taking from as much as I could. A lot of going back to school was because I felt like I had this like amorphous kind of understanding of this stuff, but no grounding in it, no like real background. I just sort of I knew people knew I liked it. I knew I liked it, but I also didn't feel like there was a lot of imposter syndrome with it, of just sort of taking quotes and sort of, I think how people get involved in it at first, especially with Jung. You like look up Jung quotes and you're like, I love this quote and that quote. And then you dive into the heavier stuff. But it definitely mapped over that entire time. It was definitely like what I was clinging to on an intellectual level, I think, to comfort me during my breakdown, which I guess I shouldn't say it's a breakdown, but it definitely in hindsight was a little worse than I gave it credit for at the time. Do you guys experience that with your clients? Do you experience that in the moment they don't realize how bad it is until they look back?
I'm not sure for myself how much I immediately connect it to clients, but I can certainly connect it to my own really difficult years. I was a whole lot younger, and I remember talking to people about, just getting through the day and putting one foot in front of the other and just keep getting through the day. And then when I felt a lot better, some years later, it was like, wow, that was really bad, but I didn't have enough objectivity to kind of look on myself at the time. Because I was engulfed by it. So I didn't have that more objective lens through which to see myself in perspective.
I'm thinking when I went through mine, I knew it was pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, I know what this
dear.
is. This is bad.
So we're laughing about it. I think this is a little bit of gallows humor because, when it's bad, it's really bad and hard and sad. It really is when it's hard, it's hard.
I remember I had moved right when my divorce was happening into this like sublet apartment that was pre-furnished, and my brother came to visit to give some emotional comfort, and he walked in and he busted out laughing, and he was like, this place looks like it just got robbed by the Grinch. And I looked around and I was like, oh, it does. He was like, look, he's like, there's wires coming out of the wall, man. He's like, where does that even go? And I was like, I know. It's pretty terrible. He's like, this is a horribly disgusting. And then he just like railed like against it. And I was like, yeah, you got a point. It really is terrible. So, but I couldn't see because like you're saying, I was enveloped in it. It's too much.
I'm thinking about our laughter now about those kinds of dark times. And I'm thinking about mythologically when Demeter's daughter had been abducted into the underworld and she was scorching the earth, trying to find her. There is a raucous, humorous incident with Babo that is obscene and gross and just, real kind of raw humor that jolted her out of her depression. And I'm thinking about you talking about this, Elliot, and going, yeah, that was a Babo moment of your brother comes in and says, this place sucks, is basically what he's saying. And I know I had a moment like that too, with other people. Laughter does do something to really make a substantive shift. It's like just daylight all of a sudden just bursts through those dark clouds. And I'm appreciating that your brother came and shook you out of it.
Isn't that sweet? So sweet.
Yeah, there's a lot of love there.
Oh, I know. I get teary-eyed. He also went through a divorce, and he was living in Hawaii at the time, and my parents were like, we need you to fly out to take care of your brother. And I was like, to Hawaii? Fine, I'll do it. Okay. I guess I'll make my way.
Take one for the team.
Yeah, who wants to go there?
Yeah. So then we're hanging out in Hawaii and we're going to the beach and it's all beautiful. And then we'll go sit at the bar and have a drink. And I start taking photos of him. And I'm like, can you just rest your head in your hands and just look like you're so depressed, like as depressed as possible, which he was. And then he would just sort of like laying down and I'd take a photo and a little selfie smiling and I'd post it to Facebook, like having a great time, just trying to make fun of him the entire time. He seemed to like it eventually. At least I like to think he did. If he didn't, he didn't tell me.
I'm thinking a little bit about the difference with client work when a tumultuous change is instigated from the outside in versus the inside out, and how those are rather different processes. And I think that when a change comes from the outside in, often there is a delayed reaction because we're not quite sure what it's going to mean as it's working down layer by layer by layer. So there's definitely a delay. I think when there's a crisis rising from the inside out, people are more in touch with their suffering because often it's been secret for a fair amount of time, and then it breaks free and becomes visible. And I'm imagining with a divorce, there's a little bit of both. There's often suffering that's been going on below the surface, and then finally erupts often in kind of a radical and swift change.
100%. I think that the initial shock of everything, the jarring like shift in my realities, I guess was so loud and I had just been so crappy about everything that there was such an immense guilt associated with my actions. And then of course it takes like a long time. It took me a fair amount of time to go from feeling guilty to also having some version of compassion for the level of quiet suffering that had been going on in my mind, in not just in relationships, but also just spiritually. Like there was a lot of, it was like realizing that I'd been very thirsty for a very long time and hadn't recognized it because I'd been, not focused on it.
And I think this idea of the spiritual thirst and then being drawn to another anima figure goes hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Because often in a man's psyche, the idealized feminine is the holder of those transcendental values. And when we cannot find that with our current partners, often the thirst will drive the psyche to project it onto someone else. And it feels unstoppably compelling.
Absolutely. That was, there was a lot of that going on at that time. It was definitely just trying so hard to find some version of stability that I think, I would take that in the form of people for sure if I could. Bad move, turns out, but it wasn't going to stop me from trying.
Well, bad move, and at the same time, it was a Felix culpa.
There you go. Yeah.
It, it blew everything up, as these kinds of things usually do, but it oriented you to your center.
100%. That's when I heard that term, I was like, that's the one. I was like, that makes total sense. And it also just incorporated a religious element. And I just love that phrase. It's very fun.
Yeah. Well, your suffering became soul making because it had meaning.
I don't know how much of it was guilt driven, but there was certainly a huge part of me that was like, I have to figure this self out as quickly as possible. Otherwise, this is all for naught. It's all for it's all wasted. And I was like, I never want to go through this again too. So it's like prepping.
So Lionel Corbett wrote this book on suffering. It's this really great book. He teaches at Pacifica, doesn't he?
Yeah, I just had him last semester. He taught Intro to Depth Psychology.
So this is a quote from his book on suffering. He says, "I believe we can say that suffering has been helpful when it results in some of the following: increased empathy and compassion for the suffering of others, improved ability to relate to others, a deeper appreciation for the ordinary things of everyday life, the dissolving of narcissistic problems such as arrogance, a deepened spiritual life, new experiences of the transpersonal self, increased wisdom, increased capacity for humor, a restructuring of values, and deepened self-knowledge. The psychotherapist's task is to assist in these developments where possible." So that is sort of the working of suffering, is to gain some of these benefits, including a deepened sense of humor.
I love that. Also, have you heard Lionel Corbett speak?
I have.
What a wonderful voice. Oh my gosh. It was like my favorite. I could listen to him talk for such a long time, but it was also very intimidating. To that point, the humorful part, I guess, it is shocking to the looking back prior to the quote unquote Felix culpa or whatever you would want to call it. Like it really was. I really was taking myself so freaking seriously that it's like, it's embarrassing now to look back on a little bit. Cause I'm like, dude, like relax, like you're like calm down. You'll be all right. Chill out and have a sense of humor about this stuff because this is insane. All of this is insane. But I wasn't there.
So, but we can see how the self engineered your fall in order for you to get out of that inflation that you were a nice, hardworking, that you were so tightly wound and in this kind of rigid ego position, and the self did its work and made your life collapse happily.
Yeah. What a sweetie.
The book is The Soul in Anguish: Psychotherapeutic Approaches to Suffering.
Really well written.
Elliot, when you were talking about feeling guilty, I was thinking about an analytic idea that guilt can be a defense against a kind of self-analysis. And there are anecdotal stories of Jung getting really big and expressive and creating some tumult around him, and then he'd kind of storm off. And apparently he would never apologize, but he would come back and his repair would be a deep self-analysis that he would offer to the other person.
He did this in the consulting room?
No, I think this is more in his personal life.
I see.
That he would come back to someone who would say, yeah, this complex was activated and these dynamics were at play. And that was his offering in return, which I've always thought was really profound, because apologies can short circuit a much deeper reparative self-awareness.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because, and I've definitely experienced that. I think the guilt, whether it's a religious upbringing or based in like a religious upbringing, or if it was just because, it was some actions I think it's okay to feel pretty guilty about. But I've had to learn over the years, and I'm still learning, how to apologize in ways that are a little bit more, like you're saying, almost not shoving things under the rug a little bit and being like, oh, I'm sorry, like I got out of hand. And instead of being like, I shouldn't have done that, I'm going through this, I'm experiencing this, you said something that caused something in me to flare up, I probably wouldn't get away with being able to just say what complexes arose. I think people might just get angry at me if I...
But it really helps ground an apology if the person, like Jung or any of us, can say, here's what I have learned about myself. Here is something that I was unconscious of that I have integrated, and I'm reporting it out to you. So it's like, oh, good, then that really won't happen again, versus just the easy shot of, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've worked with two of my best friends as both friends and business partners, and we have had plenty of opportunities to get really good at apologizing. And I'm very thankful for it, but we still got some work to do.
So, Elliot, I have another question. Such a central part of Jungian analysis is working with dreams. And I'm wondering if there was a particularly pivotal dream that you yourself have had, perhaps that was really significant on this journey.
There were a couple. I'm in a car, and there is a fork in the road. On the left is a little tiny, very steep uphill dirt road. And then on the right is a very big, nice road. I was in a car. I took the left way, the dirt road. And then as soon as I started doing it, the car started to tip over. I woke up out of fear. I had recurring dreams of a girl who's now my fiance, which was very strange at the time and creepy, and probably sounds creepier now that I say it, I guess. But the dream of the car was very strange for me. And then also I have recurring, I'm just throwing a lot at you guys because I'm really curious, if you don't mind, what you think here. And I'm taking a course right now in dream work, and it's very fascinating, but a lot. So the other one that I have quite a bit still is recurring plane crash dreams. But what I've noticed is, like, through the years, my seat in the plane has gotten better. And it would start with like it would look like an old toilet from like the 1920s. And that would be my seat on the plane. And then the plane would crash. Or it would be a seat. The next one would be like a seat, and then the seat wasn't bolted down. So I would be sliding all over the plane. Then the plane would crash. And then one I had last year was I was in first class, and I was like, well, this is just getting better and better. And then the roof of the plane ripped off. And in my dream, because I've had so many plane crash dreams, my dream ego goes, oh, it's happening again. And then I woke up.
Yeah, that's a great example of the dream series and how things change. And you can see the psyche's telling you that there's at least the sort of trappings are getting better, although somehow the core problem has not yet been solved.
Exactly. If that ain't the truth.
I'm also curious about the fiance dreams. Did you dream about her before you met her?
No, I had met her, and we'd been buds for a while. But I would have dreams where we would just be talking. We would be, I'd be at a party. We would chat with one another. And it was always very just like nice and open. It was very, in the dream, it was very easy.
Like the unconscious is approving of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Would that be a anima figure, I guess, in the unconscious?
Anima figure and a confirming dream. Often dreams are compensating or forcing us to experience something that we're avoiding. But once in a blue moon, the unconscious is just giving us a thumbs up.
Mhm.
It's very nice. I like those.
I wanted to talk a little bit about humor in dreams because I think dreams can be very, very funny, and they can use wordplay, and they can just kind of make us laugh when we get the punchline. Do you find that your dreams are funny?
No, they're horrifying. No, just start crying. I am definitely fascinated by the fact that they speak in puns.
Yes.
In wordplay is one of my favorite things in the world. I mean, it's like, what's the one? It could be you're on the green. There's the color green. It could be somebody named Green, but you only see it in color form. And there is a playfulness, I think, to dreams very often that whether it's intentional or not, it is wonderful. And it is fascinating when you can spot it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I was in the midst of trying to make a big decision. Actually, I was trying to make the decision about whether or not I was going to go get a master's degree in mental health and try to become a Jungian analyst, or whether or not I was going to go to law school. And I had just been fence sitting for a long time and hand wringing over it. And I had this dream that I had been, someone had tried to commit me to an institution, but I was trying to escape. And I was pondering this dream, and then I got it. Oh, it's like, committed, right? It's time to make a commitment,
Yeah.
So it was a dream that made me laugh when I understood.
That's great. The class in dream work currently, there's been a good amount of, we have these residential days that we'll do once a semester where it's all on Zoom right now because of COVID, but normally they're at the campus, and we would do these big intense days that last for 12 hours. And for the dream work course, this go around, a lot of what we were learning about, reading about, and doing and practicing was animating the dreams and sort of doing little physical things that kind of help ritualize the dream and help sort of bring it into your body a little bit. And it's one of those things where my cynical kind of and also slightly skeptical brain resists that stuff so much because I'm like, of all things, that's too silly for me, I guess, in some weird way where I'm like, and then I have to talk myself out of it and be like, what do you do? This is interesting and it's fun. And it's like, people have looked into this. It's not like they're just coming up with it off the top of your head. And so we ended up doing it, but it was a whole process of getting past that, that sort of embarrassment that I had because A, it's on Zoom, B, you're sharing your dreams, with a member of your cohort. They're all lovely, but it's still surreal. And then you're over Zoom doing these things and doing these, picking a movement to repeat. It was really interesting. It was, as much as I resisted it, it was still very informative and helped open up my brain to different ways of thinking about the dream that I had never even considered.
Those kinds of techniques, I think, can feel so artificial when somebody says, well, okay, then why don't you be the dog? Or talk to me as if you were the lamp post.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, but once you get into it, it can have kind of a life of its own, just like what you were saying earlier about how a joke can kind of write itself. So just sort of going there and suspending the disbelief can really provide access to our bodies and to the unconscious to put us in a different frame of mind.
It really does. It just takes that. And I imagine it's good for it's like that ego checking thing too, where you're who do you think, relax. What do you think, you think you know better than, than what this is. And so then for me personally, when I can get past that initial discomfort, it does sort of just shake me enough that I think opens up some pathways that weren't open before.
Yeah, it creates a shift. I did Gestalt training before I became Jungian, and we would do these empty chair exercises where you talk to the empty chair and then you move over to the empty chair. And at first it was like, nah, this is really, too far, too much, but it works. And it's a great experience again in sort of relativizing the ego of just do it first before you believe in it, before you think it makes sense, before it even feels right. Just do it.
I find myself circling back to your plane crash dreams. I'm just
I hope I don't.
them over. I think dreams are so rarely literal. But I'm also imagining this trajectory that you're on and things moving faster and faster, and so many different systems are at play simultaneously. For instance, just to produce your Amazon special and other upcoming projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if the dream is really about control.
I've been discussing this a little bit throughout the course, and what I noticed was a lot of the time I don't really know if the plane crashes because I wake up beforehand, and then my brain assumes that I was going to crash for sure. There was one that I had most recently where I was in the plane and I looked over across the aisle, and my fiance was in the seat as well. And behind her, through the window, I could see that the engine had gone on fire, and there was all this smoke and flames coming out. And I was like, oh, it's happening again. And I think I may have even tried to wake myself up out of the dream, but then it was like 2 days later that I don't know if you guys saw that footage of the United plane and I saw that video where it shows this engine in flames basically. And I was like, oh, that's very strange and surreal to see. And fortunately they were all safe and beautiful. And that's beautiful. But I've had some discussions about the plane crash dream being sort of, I'm trying to get somewhere and it's not happening. And there's also the realization that oftentimes I'm probably not actually crashing in it, but I am definitely free falling.
And you're flying pretty high.
Flying high, yeah. I did have the thought, and this is going to be as LA as I can get on you guys, but I did have the thought for a while that I was like, is this a weed dream? Like, do I need to not like, I was like, maybe I have to just stop smoking weed because I keep getting high and I keep like, the plane keeps crashing. I was like, well, let's try it. And I just stopped, smoking weed, and it was fine. And it was like, okay. I was like, I don't think that's it. Cause it doesn't feel like, I was like, that isn't it quite, but that's how I was trying to look at it through the puns, through the language of it.
This dream also reminds me of other kinds of dreams where people are sitting at home and all of a sudden a tornado lands next to the house, or they're at the beach and a tidal wave, begins to rise up. And the theme for me is about the ego being relativized to the larger that it cannot control. And for Jung, the larger is generally the self, the transcendent. That there are factors in the dream that are happening for reasons that we don't understand. And the ego is forced to accommodate, forced to tolerate. So I think that that's a very difficult process. So if we look at religious texts, whether it's the Old Testament or the Mahabharata, there's story after story about the divine forcing things to happen in order to move fate. And the resolution, as in the book of Job, is always for the ego to find some kind of a relinquishing attitude.
I guess it would be like the word that comes to mind is submission and allowing other factors to take the steering wheel.
To submit to something that's transcendent to the ego. Yeah.
Another interpretation I had toyed with was basically the compensatory side of it, where it's just, I think sometimes I can be very chilled out and very like happy-go-lucky about the way things are going. And I think oftentimes I might be repressing certain fears, certain anxieties that come out in the form of plane crash dreams of just sort of this offshoot of crazy emotions that I think I'm sometimes not getting out in my waking life.
It is ultimately a mystery.
But it sounds like the unconscious has something it's wanting you to pay attention to, because these dreams keep on coming and they're fairly dramatic.
They really are. I haven't had one in a while, and I'm always kind of like, has it been too long? Is it my time? It's like, is it going to be tonight? I hope not. But I like to think that it's calming down and that I'm at least holding the dream. That was something I really liked in this. A lot of what I've read in this course is like holding the dream and not trying to pin the meaning down, not trying to like narrow it into one singular thing, which I really like, and just being able to go over it in my head through all these different angles, even if it's just not smoking weed or thinking about my emotions that I'm not processing. All of it still serves a purpose of like seeming so far to at least somewhat better my life or help me make more responsible decisions, which is good.
It's that turning the friendly face to the unconscious. In the same way that in our human relationships, if we're just striving to understand someone, even if we're actually not getting it right, there's still an intimacy in the attempt.
And one of the other, I forget her name, Von Franz, I think it was her. Maybe it was Barbara. Maybe it was I forget. One of them would get mad at their clients if they did not like do the dream work and not write their dreams down. Like she was like, she's like, you have to respect what this is like and take it seriously. And if they wouldn't, she like wouldn't see them. Apparently she wouldn't do the consulting hour with them.
Yeah, that was Von Franz. That was Von Franz.
No, we need Deb to impersonate Von Franz with her German accent.
Oh my goodness. The way of the dream. The dream is very important. And it is messages from the unconscious that hopefully the consciousness will receive. And now we are going to explore aspects of the way of the dream.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Sitting bolt upright.
Sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like no feeling function there whatsoever.
Is that really how she spoke? Is that?
So that's a little film, and it is called The Way of the Dream, and you can watch it, and you will see for yourself how sort of erudite and intellectual and professorial she is, and done out of a lot of respect and love, my little imitatio.
I'm wondering, speaking of dreams, if this would be a good time for us to switch to a dream. Hello, listeners. This is Lisa, and I wanted to let you know that my book, Motherhood, Facing and Finding Yourself, will be available this May from Sounds True Publishing. In my book, I take a deep dive into the psychological journey of motherhood using myths, personal stories, dreams, and of course, fairy tales. At my website, lisamarciano.com, you can read an excerpt from the book and learn more about me and my writing. You can also sign up for my free email course when you pre-order your copy. That's lisamarciano.com. Thanks, and I'll see you soon. Today's dream comes from a woman who is 34 years old, and she's a lawyer. And here's the dream. I'm taking ballet class in a room in a famous building in New York City. The room is shaped like my old apartment in Brooklyn. The building is by the water, and there are windows but no good views. It's dark, rainy, and storming outside. The class becomes full and crowded, too crowded to really dance. I feel content. I feel like I'm home. The room is dark. I can't make out anyone's faces, including my ballet teacher's face. Soon the rain starts to seep into the room. The floors are getting wet. It seems like the room is caving in, and I am scared that the old building is falling over from the rain. I worry that the floors are getting ruined with the rain, but my ballet teacher doesn't seem worried. We all leave the room. I am worried we are running out of time and the building will collapse. No one else seems scared. There are two exits, the elevator or the stairs. The elevator looks dangerous because the rain is seeping in and the elevator runs on electricity. The stairwell shows that we are on the 43rd or 44th floor of the building. The stairs are flooded and look slippery, but I think the stairs are safer than taking the elevator. And for context, she says, I'm about to leave my law firm job and take a sabbatical. I don't know what I'm doing after. I haven't let go of my last relationship. And for feeling, she says she felt at home. She felt good moving her body, but she also felt fear and urgency. And finally, for a bit of extra context, she says, my ex lived on the 43rd floor of a building in Brooklyn. I recently moved out of New York City to live with my parents in California. My new ballet teacher is a lot kinder than the one I grew up taking ballet classes with.
The pivot point for me in the dream, I think, happens when she says, it's too crowded to really dance. I feel content. I feel like I'm home. And that when she lands that attitude is when the room darkens and all of the troubles begin. So I found myself just sitting into this complex that we often can get into, that we can retreat back to the parental complex, which feels both at home, homey to us, and also cramping and crowding so we cannot move. And she herself has returned to live with her parents. So I'm wondering if this has something to do with the cramping in the psyche, the crowding in the psyche.
So it's an image of a kind of regression, in other words.
That's what I think. And regression that makes her feel both content and unable to really dance, which I think is so well describes kind of going home for the holidays, by the way, let alone going going home in our attitudes back to the old way of being.
Well, and the old way of being is also crumbling.
Right? The
Yes.
psyche's not really approving of her regression.
Well, it seems like a real salutio of all this water, all this dark, stormy, wet flooding in the context of her preparing to take a sabbatical, and she doesn't know what she's doing afterwards. So it feels like a real life change, maybe parallel to you, Elliot, sort of a dark night of the soul. And she hasn't let go of her last relationship, which, quote, coincidentally, unquote, enough, her ex lived on the 43rd floor of a building in Brooklyn, and she is about to descend a stairwell that's on the 43rd or 44th floor. So it feels like there's going to be a safer way to get down, but it's going to be a real descent, and descents are difficult.
Yeah, she's being forced to leave.
Yes.
I do think the inner ballet teacher is a symbol of resilience. I think of those images of the old ballet master with their cane and their incredible, ferocious determination, that everyone's going to comply with it. So the ballet teacher could offer some sense of her own resilience and tenacity so that she can, get out of the ballet studio, but maintain some sense of self.
I think at the end, this contrast between the stairs versus the elevator is really interesting. I mean, it is a little bit like that road less traveled metaphor in a way. It's like the easy way would be the elevator, but of course there really is danger there. You're not supposed to take the elevator in case of a disaster like this. But the elevator, it moves us. We don't have any agency once we're in an elevator. It's not under our own steam, and it's a kind of collective mode of transport because we're often in elevators with other people. Whereas going down the stairs, as Deb was saying, it's a descent, but it's dangerous too. It's slippery, but it's going to be under her own power. She's gonna be in charge of the descent.
So it seems like the storyline or the arc of the dream is that when she's in the ballet class with her new, more kindly teacher that she associated to in the family complex, then all this stormy, wet, soaking, dark, stuff comes through, and she's forced to do her own individual thing, which is to make this difficult, lengthy, and very slippery descent.
And correct me if I'm wrong or if I say something that sounds too dumb, but is water itself isn't it supposed to? I've read somewhere that it's symbolic of the unconscious, and so she's in a situation where it's seeping in to her surroundings and affecting her decision making. I got a thumbs up. I'll take it.
And causing a dissolution of the building.
Yes.
The building
of the structure.
Right.
Yeah.
The old building is falling down from the rain. So this is a particularly caustic kind of rain.
And Edinger, in his book, what is it called? Psyche and Symbol? No. Anyway, there's an alchemical book where he describes solutio, the dissolving of the old, often associated with alienation and depression, and all your life structures just sort of melting away as the first stage of the work.
Yeah. And I it's funny, I was thinking about the situation where she's in, where she's lost this relationship. She's lost her home. She's moved away from New York. She's presumably losing her career.
Yeah.
There must be a lot of grief.
Oh, yes.
And all of the rain and all of the water seeping in. Elliot, I think you're right. I think it's the unconscious, and also feeling. There must be a lot of feeling. My hunch is she may not be in touch with that feeling yet. And that's where from this dream.
I was wondering about that too. I had a fantasy that as an attorney, her ego is a kind of sensate thinking type. And that what's coming up in the dream is a more intuitive feeling dynamic. And often the opposite typology, particularly towards midlife, starts to press up. We'll often dream of situations that are bringing up what we're not living out.
And Joseph, that's great, because what that makes me think of is, being on the 43rd or 44th floor, you're really high up above things. So that, again, is this kind of, maybe intellectualized attitude. And now she's going to make this descent into perhaps a more of a feeling function. It's interesting that the stairs are flooded even up this high.
Yeah, she's going to have to get in the water in order to escape, we can imagine.
Yeah.
I also think of rain, as you were bringing up, Elliot, as a symbol. Rain is very complicated. I mean, it's a complicated phenomena in the world, how rain is created, where it falls, where it doesn't fall. And rain is also a kind of bivalent image. Too much rain creates a problem. Not enough rain is a problem. Just the right amount of rain produces fertility. And there's something transcendent about rain. It falls from the heavens.
I wish her the best. That seems like she's starting a big journey.
I'm having the same reaction. I'm having wanting to wish her well.
And it's such a mythological path, the descent. So she is in good company with human condition and traditions. She's in the context of something greater already.
I think it's interesting that she threw in my new ballet teacher is a lot kinder than the one I grew up taking ballet classes with.
Yeah.
If you're 34, you shouldn't be settling for a mean ballet teacher anymore.
That's right.
That's what I got.
It's unclear in the dream whether this is the old or the new ballet teacher, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, she can't see her face.
The other thing is that the ego is very, very anxious, but the other characters, as she says, don't seem particularly worried about things.
Which is a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a little confrontation there that the dream ego is fretting, perhaps needlessly, about these transitions or the putrefactio, the dissolving of the old, is perhaps not worthy of the amount of fear that she's bringing to it.
Is that what that typically means if you sort of look around and other characters are in the dream are calm and you're not? Is that typically a good sign?
One of the attitudes that we take is that the dream ego is the least reliable part of the dream because the dream is designed to act upon the ego's attitudes. So the ego's interpretation that things are frightening, or the ego's assumption about various things which actually don't show up in the dream, we often hold with a little bit of suspicion. And so we look off into the facts of the dream, which are less interpretive. And, the fact that the ballet teacher and the other students are pretty calm about it, or that's the feeling of it, lets us know that the ego might be the thing that's in a froth.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.